Frustration of contract is where something happens, which means that the contract can no longer be fulfilled. So if an employee, let's say, gets sick and they're no longer able to continue doing their job, if, let's say, an earthquake happens and where the person was working is destroyed, that's a frustration of contract too. If something happens, which means that the employee is no longer able to keep working for whatever reason through really no action of either party. Frustration of contract generally in the workplace environment happens when an employee gets sick and they're no longer able to work. That generally happens once it's found that the employee is no longer able to return to work after a reasonable period of time. The courts in Ontario are flexible in terms of how much time an employee is able to take off should they wish to return back to work, but often employees and employers often look at a 2-year time period for an employee being off of work and not able to return, somewhere between sort of 2 and 5 years. So an employee could probably claim frustration of contract if they wanted to claim to leave and get paid their severance pay because they're no longer able to go back, potentially at around 2 years or so. And then eventually an employer might also say the employee isn't able to come back. If the employee wants to come back, they can probably stay at least some period of time, but once you start getting over 5 years, it's going to be a lot more difficult. If an employee isn't able to work through no fault of their own, then generally that would be considered a frustration of contract. And that means that the employee is entitled to some amount of severance pay because they're no longer able to keep doing their job, or their job isn't available for them to continue working. The test for frustration of contract is when a situation arose for which the parties made no provision, no planning in the contract. So the contract itself doesn't anticipate the employee becoming sick or the employer no longer being able, because of some change, to be able to provide work through some act, outside act, or act of God, as was once said in contracts.